Bună ziua, bine ați venit. Hello everyone, welcome. And it is my absolute pleasure to be working in concert with the New Strategy Center as one of their many subject matter experts, but also as the president and founder of the Romanian chapter of the Association of the United States Army. I know at least one person on this panel knows what AUSA is. 2 million members strong, and we have a chapter here that supports our U.S. soldiers forward stationed and forward deployed in Romania. So my absolute thanks to Mr. George Scutaru and the New Strategy Center for allowing the Association of the United States Army to partner on this panel. One of my absolute favorite topics about military mobility, and I know the name of this panel is A Long Road to Tipperary. I think Tipperary is about an hour north of Bucharest, by the way. But I used to work for a gentleman by the name of General Ben Hodges, who now is coming through the door, so now I'm going to be even more self-conscious, sir. Thank you very much. And General Hodges, at one point when I was a member of his staff, used to say, amateurs think operations, experts think logistics. And he would tie that discussion to military mobility and the importance of being able to get soldiers' supplies to the fight as being paramount and being really difficult work to do. And here on Romania's eastern flank, nowhere is that more important, where roads, where bridges were not necessarily designed to handle things like the M1 tank. And other armored vehicles. So it is with that small intro that we will lead into the panel. And since experts think logistics and military mobility, we certainly have experts that are assigned to this panel today. And from my right to my left, some brief intros. First and foremost, Lieutenant General Retired Charles Hooper, who joined the Cohen Group as a senior counselor in October 2020, following a 41-year military career. His most senior role was director of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, where he oversaw more than $50 billion in annual U.S. arms sales and 20,000 personnel worldwide. He also served as the U.S. Defense Attaché to China, accumulating 7 years in Beijing, and as senior U.S. defense official at the Chief of the Office of Military Cooperation, U.S. Embassy in Cairo. General, welcome. Second, someone whom I know quite well, Mr. Ionel SCRIOTTEANU. He has served as the State Secretary of the Romanian Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure since November of 2019, where he oversees the naval infrastructure sector and coordinates military mobility policy. He previously held senior public administration roles, including at the leadership level of Ilfov County Council. Welcome, Mr. State Secretary. Someone else who I am fond of perhaps calling a battle buddy, General GOLOGAN, Major General Mircea GOLOGAN, serves as the Deputy Chief of Defense for Resources of the Romanian Armed Forces since December 2024. Over a 3-decade military career, he has held senior command and staff positions both nationally and within NATO structures, including NATO headquarters and Allied Command Transformation. He holds a PhD in military sciences and has deployed on international missions in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Afghanistan, where he served as Romania's senior national military representative. General, welcome. Another person whom I know well, and certainly no stranger to the New Strategy Center, Brigadier General Hans DAMEN, retired, served in the Royal Netherlands Army for 40 years. He worked as a soldier and diplomat and was the first leader of the PESCO project for military mobility. During his career, he was recognized as the best civil servant of the Netherlands, 2013, and logistics guru, 2018. I would like that title, sir. I would like guru anything as a title. He currently works as a strategic advisor at Sparcom and remains committed to international stability and world peace. Welcome, General. And finally, Alexandru Petkovic is the infrastructure director of the Prager Global Network Alex has over 14 years of experience across both public and private infrastructure sectors in Romania. Formerly worked on the beneficiary public authority side at National Roads Company, Regional Roads and Bridges, Directorate Cluj. Currently oversees major contractor infrastructure projects, including the North Bucharest Ring Highway, focused on aligning Romanian infrastructure development with NATO mobility and strategic transport requirements. Sir, as someone who drives that beltway often, mulțumesc tare mult, that's one of the projects I'm most interested in. So thank you and welcome to you all. So the way this will work, each individual will have approximately 5 to 6 minutes for an intervention based on the topic of military mobility. Certainly one of the questions that we hope to address is, to what extent do infrastructure limitations undermine NATO's ability to implement its defense plans in Europe and in the Black Sea region? These and other questions related to mobility are what the panel will ask. And then I will immediately go to all of you for questions. And if not, I will have some questions prepared myself. So, General, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here with you all today to talk about this topic, which I think is at the core of NATO's ability to fulfill its mission, but is often overlooked. I was talking to Hans before our panel. It's often overlooked in favor of operations and politics. And I've been thinking, logistics always takes a back seat. Maybe we need the American actor Tom Hanks to make a movie about logistics. Okay? He's just finished his latest series on World War II. By all accounts, it's one of the best ever filmed. And so I think if we had Tom Hanks make a movie about NATO logistics, with Tom Cruise starring as the tough Romanian logistics officer with a heart of gold, maybe we could get some attention placed on logistics. So the fundamental question is this: can the alliance, and especially the United States, actually move, reinforce, and sustain combat power fast enough to implement its defensive plan in Europe, especially in the Black Sea region? And I would say right now the answer is yes, but with growing difficulty. Okay? The core issue is not whether or not NATO or the United States possesses the military power. It does. The issue is whether NATO can translate that power into the operational effect quickly enough under modern wartime conditions. Okay? Increasingly, the limited factor is not combat capability alone. As our moderator said, it is infrastructure, logistics, and strategic mobility. And this is particularly the case when you consider that the U.S. may have to divide its strategic mobility assets between Europe, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. So for decades after the Cold War, NATO optimized its expeditionary operations for places like Afghanistan. And today, regrettably, the alliance must again prepare for large-scale territorial defense in Europe. That requires moving a massive amount of equipment, armor, fuel, ammunition, air defense systems, and sustainment supplies across this continent and across the Atlantic Ocean. But Europe's transportation architecture was largely designed for commercial efficiency and not wartime reinforcement. And as a result, the infrastructure limitations now imposed major operational friction on NATO's defense plans. And many of you won't be surprised by this, but it includes ports that cannot rapidly absorb military surge traffic, rail systems with bottlenecks and incomplete standards, bridges unable to support heavy armored formations, fuel distribution, airfields vulnerable to missile attacks, slow border crossing permissions, and insufficient stockpiles of repair supplies. Now, these don't make a NATO defense impossible, but they will create delays, and time is not our friend. In modern warfare, delays are strategic vulnerabilities, and the problem is especially acute on NATO's eastern flank. Now, we all know the Black Sea flank presents a uniquely difficult operational environment for NATO. Of course, our allies here in Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and others anchor the southeastern flank, but the region faces several constraints simultaneously. First and foremost is Russian anti-access and missile capabilities in Crimea, which are within reach of this area. Limited naval maneuverability, governed by the Montreux Convention, political differences among allies, limited redundancy in transportation, and heavy dependence on a small number of ports and corridors. And what this means in practical reasons is NATO cannot rely solely on maritime reinforcement. Instead, we must depend heavily on land corridors, rail mobility, airlift, river transport along the Danube, and I had a great conversation with my colleague Ben Hodges about this, fuel pipelines and logistics hubs. You know, I remember about a year ago I took a train to Kyiv, and of course you have to go to the Polish border and take the train to Kyiv, and I had a great visit to Kyiv. And I remember as we approached the Ukrainian border seeing miles and miles of trucks backed up on roads. And of course, as an old infantryman, the only thing I could think of is, wow, what a great target for all those trucks. And so this is part of the problem we have. Romania's port constraints in Constanța have become especially important because it serves as one of NATO's key logistic gateways into the Black Sea theater. And of course, it's adjacent to MK, the base down there, and that makes it very important. But it also makes it vulnerable. Okay? So the real challenge here is not only moving forces in theater, but sustaining them under attack. Now, people talk about civilian transportation networks and wartime transportation networks as if they're two different things. Hey, guess what? The transportation network is the transportation network, okay? Wartime or peacetime, okay? We'd rely heavily on commercial rail operators, civilian truck fleets, port authorities, commercial shipping, airports, telecommunications, and energy grids, okay? Every architecture is a dual-use architecture, okay? But they were not designed to support military operations. So this requires several reforms. NATO and the European Union should need what many analysts would call a military Schengen agreement. In other words, the ability to cross borders easily without having to coordinate, okay? And that would be for hazardous cargo, heavy equipment, rail access, and airspace transit. Second, civilian infrastructure upgrades must be built to military standards. That means stronger bridges. We talked about the fact that most of the bridges in Europe cannot support the M1 Abrams tank, and that's a problem, okay? Expanded rail sidings, roll-on, roll-off port facilities, hardened fuel depots, airfields capable of supporting heavy transport aircraft. Third, NATO must routinely exercise with civilian transport providers. Future exercises should simulate, not wave away, simulate port congestion, rail disruption, cyber attacks, drone strikes, sabotage, refugee flows, and fuel shortages, okay? Because these are the conditions that are likely to define any future conflict with Russia. And let me talk about my country for a minute here. At the U.S. level, the single greatest strategic mobility concern is sea lift. We have about 125 ships in our military sea lift command. They are old, and we're not building ships the way we should and the way we need to. Heavy armor, ammunition, fuel, engineering equipment, and sustainment stocks have to be moved by sea. Now, we have 225 C-17s and 52 C-5s, but they can't fly everything here that everyone's going to need. We need ships to do that, okay? We have a Merchant Marine Academy. Most of the graduates of that Merchant Marine Academy go to work for other flagships under other flags, not U.S. Merchant Marine. We don't have a Merchant Marine. And so we have a shortage of ships and a shortage of people to pilot those ships, okay? We need to expand our pre-positioned stocks in Europe. APS-2, which is the stock that's here in Europe, is absolutely essential. We need to harden logistics nodes. We need better fuel resilience, more munition storage, improved repair capacity, greater redundancy across transportation networks, because modern warfare is contested logistics from day one, to what your boss used to say. Okay, and I'm going to finish here. But the bottom line here is the EU has earmarked $70 billion and identified 500 priority infrastructure projects, but independent auditors have flagged that the funding is still short, project selection does not reflect military urgency, and the bureaucratic hurdles remain. We have not done enough. And I can say that especially here in the Black Sea region where we are vulnerable, okay? Strategic mobility must be treated as a core element of deterrence. We need it, and the alliance, if the alliance can move, reinforce, repair, and sustain combat power under attack, we will have a chance of being successful in this fight that we have to face together. And I'll stop there.
General, thank you very much. Domnul Secretar de Stat.
I will kindly ask you to take headsets for the interpretation. I will be speaking in Romanian.
În primul rând,
First of all, thank you for your invitation. You should be hearing me on channel 2, yeah. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Hello, everyone. Romania has taken specific steps ever since 2020 to develop and build dual-use infrastructure, civil and military. We first of all build for the economic environment this infrastructure, but the investment plan set up in 2020 and approved in 2021, we stressed and included projects with, and we've provided greater scores to projects that provide dual use. For military mobility, as I see it, and the analyses that we have received from the Ministry of Defense, I would see it in four main ideas. It's not just about infrastructure, and it is very well that the base is the infrastructure. The second point consists in means of transport that use this infrastructure, especially for rail infrastructure. These means of transport that have to serve civilians and military purposes. The third point, as we heard General Harper saying, is the military Schengen, allowing mobility between the states so that we can take bureaucratic procedures and have a very easy transit of the borders. And the fourth point would be the hybrid war and the vulnerability of transport systems on or in reference to the hybrid warfare. Taking these 4 points into account, we have to start from this to develop our infrastructure. And this takes me to a very important integrated military-civilian program, SAFE, with European funding that we have in implementation, setting specific restrictions on commercial policies and competitiveness in the procurement procedures. We have to consider that in a very short time, because I mentioned cyber vulnerabilities, we will have to purchase from safe areas for the railway infrastructure that is now fully digitalized with the new projects. So we will have to purchase equipment also taking into account the cyber protection vis-a-vis the military mobility. So we have to strike a balance between the commercial use and the cyber protection use for this infrastructure in our tendering procedures. Now, this balance has to take us to an economic efficiency of the infrastructures because, first and foremost, we speak of dual use, and they have to be efficient economically, not to take us to a point at which we create the infrastructure that is very meets very well the military needs, but as far as costs go and implementation and economic efficiency takes us to a non-competitive area. As regards developing this infrastructure in Romania, as the General mentioned, the main hub, transport hub is Constanța harbor, and we have a railway link between Constanța and the MK base because as we see from the European strategy, the railway system has to be the backbone of military mobility in Europe. We have the 4 European corridors that, so at the European level, crossing Romania, the most important access being the vertical corridor north to south, that is being developed now through road infrastructure. And if in 2020 we spoke of a full lack of high-speed infrastructure to the northern part of the country, we can say that we already have nowadays 320 kilometers of highway adding up to Pashkan in the north, about 100 kilometers north of the Syrian border and 100 kilometers from the eastern border to Chisinau again. With the foresight that in the next 3 years we reach Siret and Ungen, actually crossing over into Ukraine and Moldova with a transport infrastructure built with safe investments that Romania undertakes. Now, on railway infrastructure, the main action coming up next would be to finalize the corridor that crosses the Carpathians and, of course, investments in the M500 on the north-south axis linking us to Moldova and Ukraine. That's it from me so far. As regards the investment program, this will undergo a revision because it entails 2021-2030 as a time frame. So given the evolution of financing and this new SAFE program that we are implementing and the new European military mobility strategy, throughout this year, we will see a revision of this investment strategy, and we will also take into account the new European funding programs that will focus quite a lot on military mobility. In this case, we have to consider again a discussion with the European Commission to re-include or include, says the speaker, in the military mobility circle the airports, because nowadays we no longer have any type of funding possibility for airports. And we have to invest, for example, for runways in Timișoara, that requires investments that the Romanian state cannot support at this point and that are not eligible for European funding. So in this case, given the latest military situations and using military transport by air, I think we need investments in several areas throughout the country for which today we do not have funding. Thank you very much, State Secretary.
I usually don't need a microphone because I'm infantry, but for the recording purposes, I will make an exception today. Before speaking about military mobility, always it is to make sure that everybody understands the same when hearing military mobility. Of course, that professional involved in this understand better, but it is worth speaking to audience about the four pillars of military mobility, which were somehow already mentioned, but it is worth putting. So, of course, that anybody assume that it is infrastructure. And infrastructure, it is roads, railroads, airports, and maritime, and ports, maritime or internal waterways ports. Of course, that after that, what goes on the roads, it is the capabilities, which could be trucks, rail cars, ships, and the airplanes. Okay, that's common for everybody. It was mentioned that we would need something like military Schengen, which is a good idea, but I think that the marketing, it is not the proper one. Because you need first procedures, and for the procedure, it would be easier that NATO and EU agree on the same form, like 302, which is already used by NATO, and I don't see a big problem for EU to take that as a model. It would merge, it would ease the procedures. But the fourth part, it is really seldom mentioned. It is about information exchange. You can have the same procedure, but if you don't exchange information and you don't have the same interoperable communication means, and if you do not plan in advance for military movement of large forces, you will not be able, even if you have a military Schengen, to do it. Because planning, it is also speaking about timelines and resources involved. Okay, so these are the 4 pillars of the military mobility. What it is not here, and I think that should be added, it is the POL, the petroleum or lubricants or what, energy, in short, energy. So whatever it takes, electrical for the electrified railways and everything. So you need to account for the consumption. What moves, what gives the energy to move that force. And when you will be happily being relieved by yourselves, saying, I solved all the 5 questions, account for the enemy. And that would be, again, very troublesome. So these are the 5 things plus enemy I would urge you to think about when speaking about the military mobility. In very short, I will try to look on the question David put to us, and I will not use them as questions, but like probably problem statement, and I will try to give you a very short solution, or not necessary solution, my thought. So, how the infrastructure limitation undermine NATO ability to move forces? This is simple. We were not in the same picture. We were on, let's say, opposite military blocks, even if Romania never thought that. So we cannot have the same system at this moment, so we should have one. European Union was smart enough to think about the 10th. Trans-European Network Transportation, 10th core, the 4 corridors the State Secretary mentioned, which are used also by Romania. So exactly this is the point. When speaking about dual use, actually it is not dual use as such for the entire part, but only for small parts of the system. So we will use whatever the mobility corridors, the 4, because it is enough, it is comprehensive. And speaking about dual use, you have 2 points to look. Bridges, tunnels, and military load capacity, and the connectivity from my depots and my military base to the 10th, to the core network of transportation. The good news it is that for my bases and my depots, to connect to the main roads, it is usually 1.5, and I don't know any example which is more than 5 kilometers. So it would be easily done. And I will connect this with your last question, which investment and policy changes are needed because of the fragmentation in Romanian legislation about WATE, which is administrative territorial unit, and who is responsible for making an investment project to rebuild or refurbish a certain road. I would say that all the roads connecting military bases to the main road would be moved to the national company, and we discussed this, and we are on the good track with the Ministry of Transportation. Second, how civilian network transport can be better integrated in military planning? I would say that it is, because all our plans are accounting for, because as General Cooper said, there is only 1, there are not 2, and of course that they are designed to support the economy, as the State Secretary, because economy drives, and we, the Army, defend the people and the economy. And the third question, which is really worth using today in the debate, it is about the Danube. Of course, that you mentioned that railway transportation should be the backbone if you are speaking on the earth, above the ground transportation. But if you speak about sheer volume, even if the speed is not that big, Danube would provide you the benefits of the maritime transportation without taking the challenges to protect those lines of communication. So that would be my points here. Thank you.
General Gologan, thank you. General Damen, over to you, sir.
Thank you, David. Most people know that logistics has been a big part of my career, and military mobility, as you mentioned, David, became an intense part of it in my last year in the military. It's confronting, though, to realize that Dutch Minister Janine Hennis launched the initiative in 2017. We are now 9 years further on, and we are still asking ourselves questions about limitations undermining NATO's ability to implement defense plans, whether civilian transport networks can be better integrated, whether we should use the Danube River for transport, and what investments and policy reforms are most urgently needed. 9 years on. As announced in the White Paper for European Defence Readiness 2030, the European Commission and the High Representative adopted the Military Mobility Package 2025, building on lessons learned from the revised Action Plan 2.0 and the 2024 Military Mobility Pledge in close coordination with the European External Action Service and the European Defence Agency in order to move towards a military Schengen, the military, blah, 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 blah. 9 years on. 9 years on for what the EU is calling her flagship PESCO project. Brussels bureaucrats will describe this as progress. I read a sperm-killing language like this, and all I want to do is lay down and slowly die. Which is what is going to happen to a lot of soldiers and civilians if we don't speed up the process of really improving rules, procedures, infrastructure and IT described in all these packages and plans. Don't get me wrong, I'm 100% in favor of everything described in the avalanche of documents. The problem is that almost all these plans and bright ideas were already discussed and mostly agreed on in the November 2018 meeting of the PESCO project. So what is really needed? Adopt the Nike motto and just do it. I'm happy that there are nations that are not waiting for more policy and implemented real improvements. The Nordic group has made mentionable progress in establishing the Northern Corridor. Netherlands, Germany, Poland are establishing a critical military Schengen transport corridor to fast-track troops and equipment from North Sea ports to NATO's eastern flank, and are expanding this concept to include Lithuania, Belgium, Czech Republic, Luxembourg and Slovakia, enhancing rapid response capability across the region. With European fund, bottlenecks in infrastructure were taken care of in the Baltics, Italy, Croatia and Portugal, and a couple of other nations, and 500 more hotspots have been identified. The operational word, European funds. But military mobility should not only depend on the fact whether Europe is willing to spend money on it. My message today is the same as I gave in my last PESCO meeting. Don't ask what the European Union and NATO can do for your country. Ask what your country can do for military mobility. And to quote Miss Congeniality, world peace. Thank you very much.
General Damen, thank you. I always walk away from the new Strategy Center with at least one really good quote. Congratulations. Yours is that quote. And finally, Domnul Petkovic, over to you, sir.
Bună ziua, mulțumesc mult pentru invitație.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. Today I'm talking from the position of the one who actually builds infrastructure along strategic corridors. I'm an engineer, so I will try to bring a technical contribution to the panel. Any experienced engineer knows a simple thing: it's always easier to do something well and design
well from the beginning instead of fixing or adjusting later. I think it's obvious this applies directly for military mobility, and I believe that we have analyzed and identified 3 concrete pillars I want to briefly present now. First, the terms of reference, the technical specifications in the terms of reference for tendering procedures. The best news for us who participate in tender procedures is the fact there is an explicit obligation to comply with dual use requirements as per the European regulation and the safe regulation. So beyond that, there is a need for effective implementation in technical projects. We need that military standards and specifications should be applied and transposed according to technical standards in Romania. I think that will be a challenge to be able to adapt our standards to the requirements of dual use. The second pillar is geotechnical and structural monitoring, because we can't decide on what bridges we need to reinforce unless we know what is their actual capacity. We need to perform real measurements before execution to have complete inventory, to take stock and see the actual situation in the field, not as we know it in the office. We need to identify the proper structures to actually validate the dual use of the infrastructure. After execution, I believe we need continuing monitoring, because critical infrastructure cannot be left unmonitored. The third pillar I want to speak of, financial mechanisms. Romania now has a very well articulated PPP framework. We have 7 methodological guidelines to compare with. Greece has 32 PPP contracts signed by a central unit for complex dual-use projects, railway projects, strategic storage capacities. I think PPP might expedite execution, transferring risks toward the private sector and enabling the use of private money. The success, of course, will depend on the constructor, on the institutional capacity, and on the legal framework. In the end, I'd like to say that if things are well done from the very beginning, if things are done right and designed right, the cost for dual-use structures can be only 5% higher compared to 40% if there is a need for reinforcement or adjustments later on with new projects. Thank you. Thank you.
The question and answer period right now. And as we do have mics out there, I would ask you to use them. As you queue up, though, I have one quick question to start the Q&A portion, and that the question is for General GOLOGAN. So sir, I enjoyed your comment about adding POL to mobility. After all, if you don't have fuel to run the vehicles, it's difficult to be mobile. So a good comment. And of course, Romania is, becoming more and more of an energy player in Europe with Neptune Deep, with work on Chernovoda nuclear, and of course, expansion of other energy assets. So energy is becoming more plentiful, but one might argue more vulnerable as well, especially when you look offshore. So a lot of what goes on with critical infrastructure and protection of that POL is assigned to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Do you see a growing role in the Ministry of Defense with protecting critical infrastructure specifically related to the POL that you mentioned for mobility?
Yeah, that's challenging. Of course that I cannot speak from the legislative point of view about the MOD, but I would say that in the doctrine, Romanian naval forces are not in charge of protecting critical infrastructure. They are mainly responsible to protect sea line of communication and coastal defense. So that this is a starting point. If you ask if would worth thinking how we could take joint action, MOD, MOI, to protect that, yes. But that would involve not necessarily only naval assets, would be maritime patrol assets, which we don't have, and other, especially autonomous or unmanned assets, which could be on both sides, MOI, MOD, depending. And this should be also scalable to the threat. So there is no easy answer. In principle, because we are one nation, we should do better. How it will evolve, I cannot give you the answer. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Now, over to the audience. Questions, please. Sir.
So I was listening to Mr. Petkovici talking about how good it would be if we knew the requirements, if we knew what weight, and we've known this for years. So I don't know, now that we have the regional defense plans that SHAPE has produced, I mean, we know exactly what needs to move where. So what maybe General GOLOGAN or Hans, you might have some idea just from your own experience. What's the holdup on transferring those requirements from the military side to the ministries or industry that has to deliver? What is I don't understand the holdup.
Yeah, if you allow me, I'm not going to say anything about internal affairs in Romania. But what we need in every country is a whole of nation approach, a whole of society approach. And once again, the military load classes of every bridge and everything, that was in the 2018 plan for military mobility, and nations pledged to do that inventarization. You don't have to be a Russian intelligence officer to realize what the main military routes are through a country. In the Netherlands we got 3 north-south and 3 east-west, and same for every country. And that inventarization is not criticism, but that inventarization should have been done 6-7 years ago. And going back to that whole of society approach, we have the same problem in the Netherlands. Who is going to protect the oil refineries in the harbor of Rotterdam? Yeah, okay, we don't have enough means, but it's considered as a problem for the whole country, which we will have to solve using all the means we have. I was at a conference 3 weeks ago with a lot of policemen and firemen, and they were discussing maybe we should buy helicopters, because if there's a fire, just a wood fire, a fire in the woods, when the army is in Lithuania or in Poland, who's going to deal with that fire? So look at all the stuff you have in the country, all the stuff you can use in the country, also the civilian stuff you can use in the country, and make a plan to combine all these assets and use them in the best way possible, knowing that you'll never have enough.
Next question, please.
For General Charles, really, I think when we look at lessons learned from Ukraine, there's a lot of talk about the dispersed battlefield, spreading assets, agile combat employment, spring-loaded logistics. And yet when you drill into the holdings of lift and fuel tankers that allies have, there seems to be a big gap. Is that just a question of money, or is this a problem of logistics, again, coming second in our thinking?
Well, I'll start off. I think it's a question of money and will and priorities. It's money and will and priorities. We haven't placed, we've spent a good part of this century dependent on commercial shipping and fighting in places where our sea lines of communication weren't particularly challenged. And now we're back to an area, for example, where, of course, our sea lines of communication are going to be challenged. You know, for example, our northern supply network into the North Sea, that's going to be interdicted. That's where Russian submarines live, okay? And if I was the Russians, that's what I'd do. So the southern tier becomes important. But in terms of shipbuilding and in terms of dedicating the resources, we haven't had to prioritize it, and so we put our resources elsewhere. But now we find ourselves in the position that we have insufficient, particularly sea lift, to move this stuff quickly. And if we don't move it quickly, the war will be over before the first ship leaves Norfolk. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, sir. There was a gentleman in back with a question, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Navy Captain Putnar, Director of Romanian Naval Staff. I thank you to Admiral Gologan for having mentioned the Navy mission, and I want to add something. During peacetime, our Navy is not allowed to conduct any operation outside the Romanian territory, so that our area of operation ends at the limit of territorial sea, 12 nautical miles. So that the question would raise, who is going to take care of the maritime infrastructure, being it critical or not? Romanian Navy is not the only Navy having this constraint. There are several navies, and I will cite German Navy. The next question, are there navies who can operate globally? Yes. In the UK doctrine and the US doctrine, they have the so-called national and global operation. The best example is the Joint Expeditionary Forces led by UK operating in the Northern Sea. Why? Which is the national interest of UK? So 70% of the gas is furnished by Norwegian fossil resources. And just to clarify the situation, so yes, we are not allowed to conduct and plan maritime operation during peacetime, but in war the situation is different. And maritime security operation encompasses even the protection of maritime critical or not infrastructure. Why? Because the third task of the maritime security operation is to protect citizen, vessel, and resources. Thank you.
So what you're saying is there has to be a policy change. No, that's okay. That's.
No, but it's completely silly.
Yes.
Obviously, we have to wait until till Russia blows up all the oil gas platforms in the Black Sea, and then you can do something. I mean, this is lawyer stuff, and we're at war at the moment. It's a hybrid war for Western Europe. If you're in the heartland like us in the Netherlands, it's far, far away. It's different here in Romania and the other frontline states. But let's please talk about the effects we want to achieve, and not give lawyers extra work and have them discuss all kinds of things and give them a good feeling. The effect we want to achieve is that we protect our assets. And that's the most important part.
I think we have time for one more quick question and response. Anyone? All right. Well, I think we have just about run out of time. Many thanks to the distinguished panelists here. Thank you so much for your for staying on time and for your fantastic discourse. If you are currently in uniform, thank you for your service to your great country. I sleep well at night knowing that the Romanian military is protecting me and my family. For those that have worn the uniform, thank you for your service and thank you for your attendance. Have a wonderful day.